Hello there, rejects. We're back at it again, podcast format. This time we're talking about something incredibly relevant in today's world. It's all the talk of the fandom these days. It's all over the internet. We're talking about the Maltese Falcon. Falcon.
That's right, the kids are going out of their gourds over that Maltese Falcon, see?
Yeah, man.
That's right.
And see, one of our top reward tiers on Patreon is whatever video you request, we must definitely do and put up on YouTube. Every once in a while, we get asked to do a discussion and not a reaction, and I'm very grateful for those. And rare is the day we're asked to review something.
Something classic.
So old.
Something
I think the last time there was something so old, it was Nosferatu, and that was something that was just a discussion and not a reaction.
Okay.
So apparently, if people want a discussion that's not a reaction, it's going to be some really old ass shit.
Yeah. Yeah, and now, I hope that we can get progressively older. Like Nosferatu came way before this, so I think now we got to go back and like review the Great Train Robbery or something like that.
Well, eventually we'll be doing the first movie.
Yeah.
Wait, no, we did do a reaction to Nosferatu. What am I talking about? Yeah.
But that's not the first movie.
That's true, but we did do it.
But it's
acting
pretty
like it was just a discussion, but it was a reaction.
Oh, yeah.
We did not do a reaction to Maltese Falcon. A few months ago, David Gandy, this is his request, he actually sent us over a few movies, 3, and one of them was this movie. And I hadn't seen it until very recently. It was sometime within a week ago or whatever that I watched this movie for the first time. And going into this, because my girlfriend Olivia is a huge fan of classics. That's her favorite genre, easily, without a doubt. There's no other genre that can outdo classics for her. And she knows that every once in a while, I'm going to have a hard time paying attention to a classic film. And so before turning it on, I just asked her, like, okay, am I going to be bored? Am I going to be bored?
I'm really curious about how this story turns out.
And she's like, you'll probably be bored. And I'm like, well, come on, there's been plenty that I actually did like. You're just not giving me credit. Then it turns into this like bickering thing about the ones I actually have enjoyed. The ones that you think. And I've turned it on, and I'm like, whatever, just pay attention. Just pay attention to this. I'm sure either way I'll grow to appreciate it.
It's a good way to approach a movie.
I did not. Yeah, pay attention, right? Pay attention. And I did not love the movie emotionally. Okay. Especially the first, upon first viewing. Mm-hmm. I did find myself randomly reflecting on it and really appreciating this movie. It's a really well-crafted movie. It's like, to my surprise, I did not know its history, and I did a little bit of research on its history, and knowing that this is like literally the defining film noir movie.
Yeah. Like it is quintessential. Like, the thing is, to discuss like the plot points would be like, oh yeah, it sounds like the quintessential film noir, and then you go back and you're like, oh, this is the quintessential.
Yeah, but film noir wasn't even an established thing then.
Yeah.
This was like an introduction to what would eventually become coined as film noir. Mm-hmm. And I found that fascinating because as I was talking about the movie with Olivia, I would use the word trope, and trope has become such a negative word. Like, if you bring up, the trope, it automatically sounds like a negative thing. But I didn't find any of the tropes to be a negative experience, because I found myself going, yeah, I've heard of all these tropes. I've seen these tropes in other films, cold-hearted detective. The only thing it doesn't have is this internal monologue,
Yeah.
But so you have the cold-hearted detective, you have the femme fatale in distress at first, who really has a secret up her sleeve,
On like multiple double crosses.
Yeah.
And you've got the big heavy with Casper and whatnot.
And there's a lot of cold characters in this movie.
Yeah.
So I wasn't upset by the tropes. Instead, I was impressed by the tropes, which caused me to look it up and go, oh, this was actually like the invention of the tropes. No wonder it's done so well.
Yeah, at least in cinema. I mean, it was adapted from a book and stuff. So
yeah, and I from what I read, the director was pretty accurate when adapting it to the actual dialogue featured in the novel. Cut out a few things here or there. but it was, and I also found it to be crafted very well.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the times when I watch these classic films, these black and white films, I notice they're usually heavily reliant on script and actors, and the directing is kind of, whatever they directed with the actors. But in terms of symmetry, sequences, shots, composing those elements, I find that to be kind of lackluster. With classic films, and you always give it the benefit of the doubt, like it's an old fucking movie, Like,
This probably was more innovative at the time, and people weren't so much like, oh, we got to make everything visually crazy.
Well, yeah, I mean, watching this movie, I did find myself impressed by a lot of sequences and the way they were captured. A lot of very specific, like there's symmetry in a lot of the way this movie is captured, and there's even a very big awareness of increasing tension and increasing energy in terms of its pacing that I just wasn't expecting walking into this movie, because it's easy to disregard. Classic film, you kind of expect a certain type of movie, and watching it, like, wow, this is actually a really impressively crafted film with some really killer performances in this movie.
Man, this movie I think sings in large part thanks to the cast. Like the main cast, like the 5-ish characters that are kind of the core of this story really are top notch, because it's such a dialogue driven. It's mostly just scenes of interplay between people and double crosses and details to keep track of, and that could easily be very dry.
Yeah.
And I feel like they really avoid that thanks to the remarkable choice of casting and just what each actor brings to their respective roles,
Absolutely. I found Humphrey Bogart especially fascinating. I mean, he's probably, this is one of his defining roles ever.
Oh yeah.
And I can see why, because what's the word? I feel like I want to say morally ambiguous, but then I'm like, I don't quite know what that means. But that's the word that comes to mind.
Yeah, morally ambiguous is sort of like you can't exactly tell if there's this particular moral code at play, so you'll kind of find somebody flirting with the line.
Yeah, and that's a very film noir trope. Private detective who kind of plays it loose with the law, but he has his own kind of code at the end of the day he lives by. And that's kind of the ultimate reveal with his character. While there's like twists and turns and zigzags that kind of happen in this movie, the reveal of his character is he has a code.
And that's such a rewarding thing at the end when he's like talking straight to her and he's like, maybe I love you, maybe I do, but I know too much about you, and I know what you've done to my partner, and it's my obligation to my part. Like he lays out his philosophy, and he touches on that note. He's like, as crooked as I'm supposed to be, this is how I actually get by.
Yeah, and it was very three-dimensional and very layered, because you could tell he is tempted by these greedy things. He is tempted by, and arguably he does give into some elements of greed. But at the end of the day, like he says there's a certain thing about, even though I was sleeping with my partner's wife, he was my partner and you killed him, and I gotta live by that. Like, he just can't go against that code, which I found to be a really interesting sort of reveal in his arc, because you are kind of, when you're watching the movie, you're like, this guy just is so impartial to like everything.
This guy's seen it all. He's clearly
he's smarter than everyone else.
He's hard-boiled.
He can outwit everybody, and
he knows all the cons and everything.
Yeah, and I like how the script is also very aware of that. Who's that actor I've seen in like several classic films?
Peter Lorre.
Peter Lorre, yeah,
as Joel Cairo.
Yeah, Peter Lorre in that movie. He does have some line of something where he acknowledges that Humphrey Bogart always has a response.
Yeah,
like he's always so smooth and quick to come up with a response, and it's easy in these kind of films where so much of it relies on rhythm of dialogue to kind of look past that. Oh yeah, of course he's slick. It's that kind of movie. But the film itself is aware of just he's always got something clever to respond with.
Yeah, well, and I feel like this is a film that is good at earning those elements and making them feel natural, whereas other movies, lesser film noir, you might go, oh, well, yeah, it's film noir, so of course he's quippy, of course there's clever dialogue, blah, blah. But this, I feel like Humphrey Bogart has a special talent for delivering that kind of hard-boiled detective dialogue and making it, like, he's got that perfect perfect demeanor where he's kind of got those like half sleepy eyes, but he always looks a little sort of bemused by the things that are going on. Like he really exudes this quiet confidence, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is also Sidney Greenstreet's first movie, which I didn't exactly realize at the time, who played Casper, the big guy whose whole thing, I love that intro.
It was my favorite.
He's so great because like his whole intro, he's like, you know, he's talking about Humphrey Bogart's mannerisms. Is like, I love a straight talker. I love a guy who gets right to the point. And like everything he's pointing out is exactly what he doesn't do.
Yeah.
You know, and he's such a great foil of a character. And to have him in cahoots with Peter Lorre too.
My favorite scenes were with them. Yeah. When those two are interacting. It's not like most of the movie, but when those scenes happen, like one of my favorite sequences, I love a one-shot take where you don't realize it's one shot.
Yeah, well, that's not the point.
Yeah, you have to like check yourself and go, oh, it's one shot. Yeah. It's the scene when Humphrey Bogart is drugged. They have this dialogue where they're negotiating back and forth, and he's just drinking away because that's his character. His character's an alcoholic. And he's just drinking away. And it's this one negotiation take that's really composed well. And then if you like really pay attention, Casper, the actor,
Sidney Greenstreet,
you could tell that he's kind of just waiting for the drug to kick in, but he's buying time. But the movie does it in such a non-obvious way because it's supposed to be an illusion, a deception. That you think they're just really having a full-on negotiation when that's not the case of what's actually happening in that moment, you know? And that's what I mean by very specific direction in this film. Like, there's a good amount of like panning around and everything like that, and some interesting shots of. I remember when he first gets the phone call that his partner dies. Like for some reason, the shot is just only on the phone when he's having that phone call, and his dialogue with whoever's on the other line is off screen. And I just love the unique choices this movie took with it. And the guy, Casper Gutman. Is that what the IMDb says? Yeah. Okay, Casper Gutman is a really, really energetic actor. And I looked it up. I had to look it up. Who plays Cairo? What's his name? Peter
Lorre.
Peter Lorre. I've seen him in a couple of other things. And Peter Lorre in this movie, I just kept asking myself, is this character gay? Is he gay?
You always wonder. I feel like there's always kind of. I feel like that's just Peter Lorre.
But I looked it up, and in the book, his character's gay.
Oh, is he really? Okay.
Yeah, but back then with censorships and stuff, they were like, gay wrong? No, yeah.
They're just going to hint at this.
Yeah, they're going to hint, because there are little nuggets there where you're like, I get the impression he's gay, or am I being homophobic? Like, what's going on? And then I looked it up, and I'm like, oh, he is gay.
Up on the subtleties of the craft of acting.
That's what they call gaydar, people. This guy has it. Yeah.
Well honed. And I mean, Peter Lorre is just such a quintessential actor in a way. Like, there's nobody like Peter Lorre. Like, the second you see him on screen, you just understand why so many Looney Tunes are filled with parodies of this guy.
Yeah.
Because and the thing is, he has such a big presence and a big personality, and there are movies where you can associate him as being very big and very kind of cartoon-like, and I feel like in this movie especially, he plays this sort of percolating energy where it's like, you know, he's clearly kind of squirrely and snivelly, but it's also a bit more of a not subtle, but just a lower key, you know, Peter Lorre. It kind of fits the scale of the movie.
Yeah. Well, was he European or something?
I think he's like German or Austrian or something.
Well, in Europe, a lot of those actors are very much trained to be very expressive and use their body language a lot. They really trained in the theater of that way. So when I watch his performances, I'm like, yeah, it's a theater performer right there. You know, that's the vibe I get when I watch him, and I think he's great. Oh yeah. Eva Archer as Gladys George. No.
Gladys George played by Eva Archer.
That's right. I'm reading the IMDb. I have an IMDb in front of me, and I'm reading it wrong. But that's actually not the one I want to touch on.
Actors on top.
Mary Astor.
Yeah, as Bridget O'Shaughnessy.
That was really fascinating performance because as a man who's slightly familiar with film noir tropes, at least being educated on it, I was really just told she was damsel in distress at the top of the movie. And then as things started unfolding, and then by the time you get to the more
involved she gets in everything.
By the time you get to the very end, you really don't know. You have no idea. She's crying and everything over she's going to be arrested and I love you, but do you?
Yeah.
You know?
And does he? You know?
See, I felt like he was at least very tempted to not turn her in.
Yeah.
And he had to fight against it.
Yeah.
Where with her, you're like, this, is she? I can't tell. And that's a good job on the performance.
Yeah, totally.
And like characters like Rebecca Ferguson in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation wouldn't exist all these years later if it wasn't for really well done characters like her way back then. You know, like this is the classic femme fatale. Can you trust her or not?
Yeah, well, and I love Mary Astor's performance in that role, partly because, at least for me, she's not exactly who I think of when I think of, you know, like the femme fatale of a film where I think of, you know, maybe somebody more like an ingenue of some sort. And she's got, you know, a different kind of presence. I don't know. She's got this kind of high class and, I don't know, like she's very pretty, but she's not like, you know, like a bombshell necessarily. She's got this kind of sophisticated beauty and this, again, the energy that she operates on. She's always kind of selling her emotions and trying to convince him of stuff.
Well, I think the director does such a good job at knowing what his performers have to really communicate at the time, because all the reveals with her wouldn't work well if you didn't truly believe she was just some damsel in distress at the very beginning of this movie.
And plus you have Humphrey Bogart half the time. Like every time he's talking about her off screen, he's basically like, I took it for granted that she was lying about whatever she told me.
Yeah.
You know, like, so every time we see him away from her, it's kind of you reminded that, you know, we can't trust this person very much. Even though, I love that ambiguity it brings to her character, because she does feel like a real character, like having you wonder about it. There is potential for her to be a real, authentic character, or be just a complete manipulator. Because, like, when she gets into the elevator at the end, that look on her face is pretty cold.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a terrific, like, that shot has always stood out to me when the grates close on the elevator and the shadow lands perfectly over her eye with the 3 notches. Like, one of them is Spade, one is Gutman, and one is...
Oh, I didn't notice that.
That's just me extrapolating Cairo, but you know, like that's kind of how I took that at the time, is like the 3 major players who, you know, getting involved with them led her to this, you know, led her to these being behind these bars.
Oh, fascinating.
That's just kind of me extrapolating, but and there are some like really, you know, even though these movies aren't as visually crazy, there are some shots that are gorgeous in this movie, and I mean, film noir is known partly for its expressive use of lighting and shadows and stuff like that, and there are, like, that's a great example of that. There's also that scene where who is it, when Wilmer comes to, and it's just a close-up on everyone's face as they're all looking at him, and that, like, that's basically the establishing shot for that moment, and you're like, oh yeah, if I was in this position, I would know right away that I am screwed. Like, you know, people been plotting about me.
Yeah, it's really, and this I think this director was his first film or something like that, or one of his earliest ones, because there were other actors they wanted for it, but they refused to work with him because he was so new or something like that.
Oh man,
I forget what I specifically read on that, but it was one of his like first films, or at least he was an unknown director at the time.
First film on IMDb.
It was his first film.
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
and I bet a lot of people kicked themselves for turning this film down, because he's got a pretty prolific catalog as well.
And I think it's just a great blend of managing. You know, it's a lot of the times in movies like this, you walk away with the impact of the mystery, but they tend to forget the character. And it's not like this movie is insanely expositional with, like, there's only one really big, huge character reveal moment, and that's the very end. But you are slowly learning about who these people are, and this obsession, like when they're freaking out over the fact that this Maltese Falcon isn't real, you know?
It's just a hunk of lead.
Yeah, it's just a hunk of lead, man.
Yeah.
And then they're still going for it. Afterwards, like, let's just embark. It's like they live more for the journey than they do for the end result.
It's the chase, it's the hunt.
Yeah.
You know, it's the stuff.
Like they lose their shit, and then, they lose their shit.
Realism.
They lose their shit, and then immediately after they readjust, and they're like, okay, let's go going on this event. It's like that's what they live for, is this obsession in this journey, that it's not about them obtaining it, which I found particularly interesting, you know? Because weirdly, all this talk about the Maltese Falcon and getting this damn thing, I feel like nowadays a lot of movies might execute that improperly to the point where most audiences are like,
Oh,
bullshit, they didn't even get the Falcon.
it wasn't even worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was pretty simple to watch this movie and go, oh, it's not even the point.
Well, yeah,
the point is how fucking obsessed they are.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing is I know we have both been watching a ton of those Screen Rant pitch meetings, and one of the jokes that I keep catching in those is about subverting expectations and how that's not just about taking the thing we expect and not doing it. It's doing that for a reason, a point. And I feel like this is a movie that, when they finally get the Falcon and they're like, this is a fraud, it's useless. That is like an earned subversion of expectation, because it says something, about everybody, and especially how they respond afterwards.
Yeah.
And so much of this movie is about those things, is about like the idea of something turning out just not to be true. It's all the lies that get told. It's all this fuss over nothingness at the end of it, because nobody is really who they say they are. Nobody's motivations ever truly line up with how they've presented them, and even the thing they're going for isn't actually real.
I guess the one thing that could be left open to interpretation that I kind of felt like I would have liked a little bit more resolve on was everything to do with his partner's wife, because it was established earlier on in the film they were having an affair. It sometimes came back into play, like one point I think she calls the cops on them, and the cops show up because she's like jealous and obsessed. But that doesn't really resolve, and that was probably the one thing where I would have liked a little bit of resolution, because I'm like, I know he's felt all this guilt and stuff, but is the ending telling me too that with all that he's come to realize, he's now gonna not sleep with his partner's wife or something? Like, I'm not sure where that's going. And I didn't particularly hate the fact that he was doing it, because he seemed like the partner was trying to hook up with the main actors. I'm forgetting all their names as I talk about
Mary
this.
Astor?
Yeah, it seemed like he wanted to. That's why he's like, I'll watch her and all that.
Yeah.
It seemed like he kind of wanted to do something with her. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's okay.
So it's okay that he was doing that. Yeah.
Well, don't worry. In the first 10 minutes of the sequel, she dies, and then he's got to investigate her murder.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of times in movies like this, it's hard to blend plot-driven movies and have just enough character in there to make it worthwhile. And I feel like the characters kind of sprinkled throughout to its ultimate reveal of who it's like part of the mystery unraveling of it is, who are these people really?
Yeah.
And I really love that's the real mystery.
And you have to figure that out through their behavior and through kind of training your eye to the things that Sam sees, because just none of the explicit text of the movie is actually going to tell you who these people are. It's all about paying attention to their behavior and stuff.
And I feel like for a classic film, it was surprisingly easy to pay attention to, because sometimes for a person who didn't grow up on classic films, I feel like if you grew up on classics, if your parents made you watch classics or something like that, it can be easier to watch those kind of movies, and for me, I just didn't grow up on these kind of movies, and it's only been in the past couple of years where I've been watching more of them. And sometimes they're very hard to pay attention to, and sometimes they're very easy to pay attention to. And I would say this is one of the ones that, after all these decades, as a viewer who's used to more fast-paced entertainment, this was surprisingly very easy to sit back, relax, and get a lot from. So
I feel like this is one of those movies that is just of a certain level of quality, that if it's like one of those bands you go see where you're like, you don't even have to like this band, but if you like live music, you'll have a good time. And I feel like this is one of those movies where it's like, you don't necessarily have to be into this. It's just well made enough to be compelling. It's like, I remember back in high school, we watched this in my film studies class. I mean, I've seen the film a few times through the course of my life, but that was one of them. And I vividly remember that in my film studies class, just most of my fellow classmates were not about these movies. We're not about the older, more classic stuff. I think we watched some other film noir joints as well, maybe even Casablanca. I know we watched Citizen Kane. People were not about those movies, but I do remember being kind of pleasantly surprised that after the Maltese Falcon was done, people were like, "This is pretty good. It's pretty good. I dug it. It was easy to pay attention to." I feel like that is kind of a mark of excellence on this movie, because it has so much that informed the genre. It's got all the double crossing. It's got all the archetypal characters. It's got a terrific cast, even down to like Wilmer, you know, it's like Alicia Cook Jr., who's been in a bunch of, you know, classic old movies as well. Like the crucial roles are cast really well. The story is intricate, but when you go back and look at it, you can see kind of all the seeds and threads, you know, it does kind of take you back to a time where like nowadays things are more sensational, and even in the construction of movies, a lot of stuff happens. There's a lot to consider. And when you go back to a movie like this, I think about focus. You know, it feels just like a really focused, really ironed out film.
Yeah, because like I said earlier at the talk of this, one thing that especially surprised me was its awareness of pacing. Because there's about a halfway point in this movie where the pace really... It's not like the movie just gets more interesting. Yeah. The pace starts to really increase. The intensity, the music starts to shift.
Yeah.
Like everything starts to get faster paced because the situation is intensifying. And I really appreciate that attention to detail. This to me is a good example of the fact that I'm not that familiar with these movies, but I'm very familiar with the tropes. And it's easy to go, oh, seen these tropes before or whatever. I was not aware this was the first of them.
Yeah.
I was not aware. So this is also a good example of just because it's a trope doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. It's a good example of execution more than anything else.
Oh yeah, because eventually you're going to be removed from the timeline of which movie came when and stuff, and every movie just needs to work on its own. Yeah. And so, you know, you can see these threads throughout so many films, and this one just does them well. You know, plain and simple. So if it didn't, it wouldn't work as well.
Well, it's a great movie. Thank you, David Gandy, for asking us to talk about it. And I appreciate it. It was really well worth the time, man. I had a great time watching it. And if you guys haven't seen Maltese Falcon, I don't know why you're sitting through this.
You just like us that much.
Encourage your friends to go check it out.
I've done it. I've watched reviews for like, I don't know what this is, but I like your review style.
I mean, we definitely spoil the movie. So
yeah, you might want to. I'm just kidding. The multi, they find it. They don't. I'm not gonna tell you.
Let's find out. Anyway, guys, for the 100 people that watch this video or listen to it, because it's a podcast, you can subscribe to the Reject Nation. Click that notification bell and check us out on Patreon. We got a lot of goodies over there. Take care.